swing, but closer.
Back out again. Okay.
There are a few things I know about Italians. 1, they love 2 cylinders. 2, they love the colour red. 3, they build things with passion. And 4, their build quality is about as reliable as a plumber's estimate. And at least one of those things needs rechecking, because actually they're not as unreliable as you might think. As long as you keep up with the servicing of these things, they should last you a fair while, and it should give you a good return if you come to sell it afterwards. So as I mentioned, this is Italian, and they obviously have painted it red because they love that colour. And I can only imagine part of the reason for that is that it looks great against a verdant background of green hills and a lovely skyline, because it makes up a similar composition to the Italian flag. So the obvious choice, clearly, was to bring it to Wales, which is very much like Italy, in a sense. We too are a passionate nation that loves the colour red. It's just that we had a divorce from Italy, actually relatively recently, and they got custody of the sun, and we get to see it every second weekend. But we make the most of that time, so let's. So I could spend a while talking about reliability and fuel consumption, very practical concerns with this bike, but I'd much rather focus on performance and feeling, just because they're a lot more interesting. Suffice it to say that none of those things are an Achilles heel to the Ducati Monster. It's perfectly fine for fuel economy and everything else concerned. So let's talk about this bike in particular. This is an S2 model Ducati Monster. You can pick these up for about £3,500. So what do you get for £3,500? Well, you get an air-cooled V-twin engine, naturally, 803 cc's, putting out 77 brake horsepower and 53 foot-pounds of torque. Moving around to the suspension, we have fully adjustable Sachs rear shock, no adjustability on the front. In other Ducati Monster models, at least, you have adjustability at the front, but not on the S2. As far as the brakes are concerned, you have dual 300mm discs on the front, 4-pot Brembo calipers on the back, 2 pots and 245mm disc. You also get oodles of torque and power low down in the rev range, and an exhaust note sweeter than Andrea Bocelli's soft tenor. So you will see 11,000 revs on the clock. Really, it's all over after about 8.5. It is a twin, so it won't rev quite as high as some bikes. It actually spikes for torque around 3,000 revs, goes up to 5,000 revs, and then actually trails off somewhat for torque, so you don't get much more the more you hold on. As far as power goes, as I say, 77 brake horsepower, and that is actually 8,500 revs. So you can go all the way up to there. I recently found that the limiter is at 9,500 revs, so that was great. But you really wouldn't want to hold on too far up to that point. I'd say it's most fun playing around 5,500 revs. That's where it's going to be most rewarding. So if you're feeling you're hanging on a bit too long, just drop it down a gear and you've got plenty of torque to pull you through. Like I say, it's nice and low in the rev range. This is best used really on B roads, A roads, so you've got lots of corners, lots of fun things to negotiate. Not so great as a commuter vehicle. I've seen them used as commuter vehicles, and well, let's be honest, pose bikes in a city, you can do a lot worse. Clearly for pose, it works very nicely, fits the bill. But as far as commuting goes and getting through traffic, it's kind of irritating. First is just too long. It will buck you around a little bit as well, so it's not the smoothest of gears. It goes all the way up to 40 miles an hour and it's still happy, which is kind of ridiculous really, and you'll be doing first gear all through town. Second gear isn't quite low enough, so if you do change it 30 miles an hour, it just doesn't feel really that happy. So if you are using it as a commuter, trust me, you're going to be frustrated by it because you're not going to be able to use it to its full potential, and it will constantly remind you of that fact. Having said that, if you are ever feeling blue on this bike, just flip the throttle once and you'll be instantly cheered up, possibly even aroused. It's also quite a light bike. So this is actually 173 kilograms dry. It's got a single-sided swing arm on the back. That will cut down a little bit on weight. It also looks quite nice. It should also make it easier to get the rear tyre off. Now, I have been told that that is absolutely not the case on the Ducati Monster, which is really irritating. Actually, to get the rear wheel off, you need an extra large socket to take off the hub nut, and you need to detach the exhaust as well, which is, as I say, irritating. But let's get back to the positives and talk about the frame. So we have a steel trellis frame. It's got plenty of flex in it, but not so much that you'd notice. It's actually been beefed up since the older models. So it's nice and firm, nice and rigid, and it really will inspire confidence when you're going through some corners because it feels nice and stable, nice and squat. It's also got really low down weight, which means that it sort of feels like it gyroscopically rights itself when you're coming out of a corner. Again, that will inspire confidence because it's quite stiff with the steering, but you know at least you've got more to go. You very rarely overjudge it where you lean in too much. Usually what you'll do is you'll lean in and then just realize you've got way more to go down into it as well. It also means that when you come back out, it feels like it will right itself. You don't have to pull it back up when you get out of the corner, which is something I really appreciate as well. I mentioned the brakes briefly on this bike, and I mentioned that I quite like them. They are really good. Plenty of stopping power on the front, nice big discs, stopping power on the back as well. Lots of feel as well. You really know where you're at with the brakes, and they don't feel too bad at all. The one thing I would say, again, back to that reliability point, I will make one issue, or bring up one issue with the reliability, which is that the back brake can bind. It has been known to bind and get hot, rendering it kind of ineffectual when you come to use it. Don't stress about it too much. If you've got one that's been well serviced, shouldn't be a problem, but definitely look out for it if you're aiming to buy one of these bikes. And as far as the levers go, they are nice and light. The brakes, you could do one finger all day long and you'll get enough braking power from those unless you've got a huge catastrophe on your hands. And the clutch is the same. You could do that one fingered again all day long. Your hands won't be too tired by the end of the day. And the gears themselves are nice and precise. There's a really short throw on the gear lever, and it's got a really nice satisfying thunk as it locks into gear. If you choose the wrong gear for a corner, you could also change down quite quickly, and the slipper clutch should take a bit of that pressure off so that it doesn't lock the rear wheel, unlike some of the old model Ducati Monsters. Monsters have been out for a while, and if you're specifically looking at getting an S2, then you're going to get something between the ages of 2004 and 2008, so it is old tech. It's got a manual choke to start. It's got the old air-cooled V-twin. It's 4-valve. It's got no traction control, no rider modes, no ABS. But you know what? That could be seen as a good thing. If you like a mechanical feel, this thing is raw. It's visceral. And I know it doesn't technically qualify as a muscle bike. You probably want to look at the S4s if you want to get something very similar, but slightly bigger and more powerful. But there is definitely still something muscular about this bike. From the raw low down power, from the squat riding position where you're over the bike and in charge, to the raw guttural snarl of the exhaust, and even this arched tank which looks a little bit reminiscent of a bull scraping the ground before a charge. Ready to do damage to your spare time, I'm sure, but happily not your wallet. You follow. Oh, there is one more thing that I should point out. The mirrors are shit. They're awful. They look like Dobby's ears, and they're about as practical as a panda's wang. The big bulbous bit at the bottom here is great for looking at your elbows, if you like the look of your elbows. Luckily I've got nice elbows. And then this little corner here is reserved for actually looking behind you, but it vibrates quite a lot and you can't really see in great clarity. So, yippee, change them. Happy, happy, happy.